Hello and welcome to the Labor John podcast. Blah, blah, blah. My name is Young Sam James, and I'm joined by my co-host.
I'm Gabe Christie, and we have two other folks joining us tonight. So if the two of you can introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about what you do.
Sure. So I'm Alex Riccio. I'm the organizing coordinator for the Philadelphia Joint Board of Workers United, which is a fancy way of saying I do a ton of shit for workers that want to form unions.
And I'm Eli Zestimpowski. I'm an organizer with the Philadelphia Joint Board of Workers United, and I have pretty much the same job. Less responsibility.
Both very important jobs, though. So we wanted to bring you guys on because we've all heard a lot about Starbucks organizing and all of the cafe and coffee shop organizing around the city and country. But I was wondering if you guys can give kind of a brief synopsis of how that started in Philly.
Sure. Yeah, I could speak to that. So back in 2019, before any of this sort of recent union wave had started, there was an independent barista council where workers from different cafes all over the city would meet up, discuss organizing, and kind of trade stories, figure out ways to try to make a union happen at their workplace. And a lot of the issue was just that there were smaller workplaces, local cafes, so a lot of traditional unions wouldn't really look at us. We didn't have a lot of external support. And then the pandemic happened, and we were pretty close, actually, to launching a few public campaigns. We did launch one, Cake Life, which the litigation went on deep into the pandemic, but the pandemic kind of tore a lot of the organizing apart, and when Starbucks Workers United came to be, a lot of these workers, a lot of the same workers, were excited to begin the process of organizing again, and so a lot of the same workers from the Barista Council in 2019 are now some of the leaders in Local 80 that organize their cafes. So it's been a long time coming, really.
Yeah, I think Eli can speak to that kind of longer history of the prior self-organizing that was going on amongst baristas in Philly. And then it seemed like, I feel like that's kind of like the first wave, like the self-defense that was created around the pandemic and workers kind of organically coming together to figure out how to fight back and like weather the storm. And then simultaneously with that, but a little bit later in time, Starbucks workers started underground organizing in what I've been corrected to be called Western New York. It's not upstate New York, but Western New York.
We barely
I'm never going to make that mistake again. That was a slow underground build for a while too, that I think was kind of happening parallel. And I kind of assume, I don't have tons of evidence to this, but I have to assume that was happening in metropoles across the country, probably like during the pandemic and like a little bit post-quarantine. Likely hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of baristas were informally coming together and creating like proto-organizing committees. Then once the Starbucks campaign took off and went public in Buffalo, I think all of that prior organizing that had happened and that like the groundwork that was laid in Philly was able to be like resuscitated to some degree and re-inspired, and then it just like blasted off. So in Philly, we had the benefit of not just seeing a ripple effect among Starbucks workers in this city organizing, but also at like non-Starbucks shops, like more like third wave coffee shops, those bougie places that make the pour over cup. Mm-hmm. Those ones were already ready and primed to organize too. And they saw this union backing those efforts. So they actually had like an outlet and a place to go to get additional support. Like Eli was saying, prior to that, a lot of unions were very allergic to even helping assist with organizing in this industry specifically with its small number of workers and high turnover rates. It's like risky and takes a lot of resources. Then the Starbucks campaign took off and it showed that there was like a path and a union that would like support that path.
Cool. And so how did those first organizing drives, I guess, within both Local 80 and the Starbucks side? And actually, if you guys can explain the kind of separation out between Local 80 and or Philly Starbucks Workers United.
Yeah. Well, really quick on that, the Philadelphia Joint Board is we would call like a regional chapter of Workers United. Workers United is an international union, and that's the union that's backing and organizing Starbucks workers nationwide. So the Philadelphia Joint Board is like one chapter of that. So in Philly, we support all the Starbucks organizing that's local to this region. We are also the joint board that is backing non-Starbucks organizing that we've formed into a new local called Local 80, because we didn't really have existing membership that exactly matched this industry and that those sets of jobs. So we realized that we needed to create a new local to house all of this emergent barista organizing, but it wouldn't make a ton of sense to like merge it into the Starbucks campaign because that campaign is national and it's against the biggest scumbag company on the planet. And it's just got a whole different set of, challenges and campaign benchmarks to hit that's not totally relevant to the more local organizing that's happening in Local 80.
Okay.
What was your other question? How did what did the organizing look like in the early waves of it?
Yeah, like what were some of the early fights? Because I was feverishly going back through the Philly Joint Board's Instagram to try and get a timeline of all the organizing.
The arbiter of all truth,
yeah,
and the house of all like historical documents are Instagram.
Yeah. But I was trying to. So, like, what were some of the early fights that were going on with Local 80?
Yeah. Well, Eli, I think, could speak to that better because they happened to be one of the first, like a worker at one of the first Local 80 shops to organize.
Oh. Yeah, so I was a worker at Korshak Bagels from the time it opened. Little known fact, actually, we were an independent union when we first started. We were kind of the last wave coming out of the independent barista organizing, its last breath, so to speak. And we unionized, we got voluntary recognition. We did it in a weekend. It was very easy. Everyone just wanted to make it happen. I think going through the pandemic, surviving and being able to survive only because of the people that you work with or your community, I think really taught everyone a lesson. So it wasn't really a hard sell, and we were only 12 workers. So we got voluntary recognition, and then we had attempted to bargain a contract, but that actually is quite confusing if you've never done it before, and we did need some professional help. And so we affiliated with Workers United, and around that same time, Good Karma and Old City Coffee were also fighting for recognition of their union. Trying to think. I think one of the reasons that we affiliated with Workers United and a lot of the local cafes affiliated with Workers United is that we had control as workers over the bargaining process, which is not typically very common. So, for example, the bargaining committee, it was myself and 3 other workers at Korshak Bagels. We were the ones that were trading language across the table with the company, supported by the staff of the Philadelphia Joint Board of Workers United. And I think other cafes that had union drives in the past that were worker driven saw that and wanted to be a part of it because they would be able to kind of retain control over the union after organizing it.
Yeah, so I think that was a key kind of reason that workers were willing to come to Workers United is they believed that it was like a member-driven union, which I do believe we embrace that organizing philosophy. And then in terms of like some of the kind of fights, like the most immediate pressing things, I don't think it's all that unique, to be honest, compared to like traditional organizing campaigns we've seen. Most of the fights come down to control over the shop floor. Like we've had since Good Karma and Korshak, there's also been drives by Ultimo Coffee, Reanimator Coffee, and Elixir. And all of those are in contract campaigns. But throughout the bargaining process, there's also been kind of immediate fights over like changes in scheduling, guaranteed hours, job description and scope of the work, just like very much like immediate daily task of work that come down to who has the power and the control over shaping these things. So it's really about a fight for democracy on the job, which I think most union campaigns, when you boil them down, are about democracy on the job. But I think the difference here is that we might be a little bit more explicit about these are kind of the goals of our campaign and our organizing. And this industry, especially when it comes to Local 80, has such daily contestations over power over the shop floor that is just like hard to ignore that reality is happening, especially when you have like small employers who typically work every single day on the job with you.
Mm-hmm.
When you see your boss and their wealth in front of you every day and like how they perform their job functions, it's not really possible to ignore that reality that like the boss has the power and you don't, and that you think you're smarter than the boss and you probably are, and they suck at what they do anyway, and that this stuff has to change. I mean, I think that is really what a lot of the fights are about. It's like who controls the shop. Not just wages and benefits and that stuff matter, but like the bread and butter issues matter. But I really think it comes down to like a broader focus on control, dignity at work, and just like democracy on the job, which of course is not a surprise that these baristas also want to make sure their union's democratic. So they don't like it when you try to impose things on them or like tell them this is the only way you can do it. It's an interesting kind of dynamism in our organizing with the Philly Joint Board these days.
Well, it certainly seems to be working. So
I hope so.
Yeah. So what kind of responses did you see from the outside community as you were going through, as all of the organizing drives were coming up?
I mean, me personally, I saw a ton of support and enthusiasm. Philly, I don't like these expressions where you say Philly's a union town, because like, is it really? What does that mean? We don't have enough unions in this city. But I do think there is a general enthusiasm and like kind of knee-jerk support for organizing in this city. And the labor movement really was great initially. Like I think people were just excited to see new campaigns. I think the Starbucks campaign has been like a real bright spot for a lot of folks in the labor movement, like desperate for wins. This looks like a great shift. And then I think just the additional organizing in Philly that we've seen, I've seen nothing but a lot of support. It's a little bit of a different reaction from bosses. But I don't know, Eli, what do you think? Like, what were the customers like at Korshak when you first unionized?
Everyone was excited. Yeah. A lot of people will come in and congratulate you on the union or tell you that, they go there because it is a union shop and they want to support union jobs. And I know the same thing happens in, other cafes. Whenever we launch, a campaign, for example, what was it, last week, a week ago? Every time's a blur, but Vibrant joined Local 80. And I happened to be there just hanging out shortly after they announced their union, and someone came in and congratulated them on their union drive, like right afterwards, which was great to see. So I would say the customer support has always been fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah. And the support from other unions has been really great too.
Yeah.
Is there any support from other unions that stood out, or?
Well, I have to give credit to the Philly AFL-CIO for doing a lot of mobilizing and support work, which, is the role of a federation, but also like one that you don't often see in the labor movement actually fulfilled. So I do think it's worthy of a shout out. The teachers unions have been really good. TUGSA was like really supportive too. The support is always, it's like interesting because every union has their own fight. And, solidarity has to work both ways. So I think while support has been good, it has been like kind of episodic and also based on like what's going on in other unions' camps. And that's just a challenge of the labor movement that we've got to figure out. It's like, how do we line up our struggles together? How do we like time things out better as a broader labor movement? Because sometimes you're on strike at the museum and that's going to clearly be your focus. And then sometimes you're on like a fight for a contract and that's going to be your focus. And so it's hard to like lend and mobilize bodies and support for other unions when you're you're constantly mired in your own backyard and your own fights. But despite all those challenges, I think other unions have at least both been symbolically supportive and occasionally like on the picket lines with us. Like, we've gotten some donations, not specifically through Philly, but like through the larger national campaigns for some of our efforts. Teamsters have been really big. We actually were on the doors, not like knocking doors of the Teamsters in the lead up to their potential strike, to kind of help build more strike support for them. So yeah, it's been largely good, but I think it could always be better. I think I was saying before we started recording, I don't really believe what we have as a labor movement, but like we're all too divided and siloed across labor unions. However, I think we're getting much, much better and much closer to something that feels like a movement.
That's a fair point. I agree. I think we're moving slowly towards a more unified. We always throw around the word solidarity, but I mean, even a little bit of solidarity helps. And going back a little bit to talking about just unionizing coffee shops in general, my idea is that these coffee shops are so small that it's a daily task. It's very personal. You get to know your barista. You go there every single morning. And do you think it makes it easier talking about having solidarity with your customers, or having the customers having solidarity with you? Do you think it's easier that way than it would be if you were working like an Amazon warehouse or in construction or something? Do you find that easier?
I think so, for sure. I think people love their local cafes. People, see how hard the workers work, and want to do whatever they can to support them. And the workers are the people that they interface with. With a company like Starbucks, turnover is kind of like a key element of their business model. And so it's really hard for them to kind of create those relationships with customers. Some workers have been there for a very long time, but the turnover is immense. And in smaller local cafes, I think people tend to stay. And I think it just makes it easier to build those relationships, to have that level of support. Customers really do want to see the workers succeed and get adequately compensated.
Yeah.
So now for a less fun conversation, what kind of responses have you seen from bosses?
Oh, that's such a fun conversation.
Well, a lot of tears. I mean, it ranges, but I would say that kind of going back to like, I don't think there's a ton of uniqueness to like what the catalyst for organizing was. I think it's the same when you talk about bosses. There's not that much unique or new about their reactions than a typical employer and a typical union buster. So you see like the same kind of set of typical responses where it's either, tears, fears, smears, and bribes, right? Like that's the kind of way that we talk about how to anticipate union busting. Or like another framework that I like to teach workers is good boss, bad boss, sad boss. Like no matter what happens, there's always going to be 3 different faces of the boss. All of them like obviously don't want a union, but you're either going to get your good boss that is going to act like they're your buddy. And, especially like one thing that I've been kind of surprised by with like the coffee shop organizing is how young these bosses are. They're all like trust fund kids that like in their 40s just like decided they wanted to like start a coffee shop chain. Whatever that's all about.
Every millennial's dream.
Yeah.
And so like them acting like that good boss that's like your friend and your buddy and hip and all that bullshit, that's really, really common, especially when it comes to the local AD campaigns. But then the bad boss of like trying to just like rule with an iron fist and scare the shit out of workers. I mean, Good Karma deserves most of the credit for how egregiously they union busted and how aggressively they did it. And their boss, Sean, deserves absolutely no patronage from any customers. The guy's a piece of shit. So that's one boss like reaction. And then the sad boss is like these bosses that, I feel a little bad being kind of mean to him because he kind of is like a sad sack, but like I would say Korshak was like that. Like Phil is this like typical sad sack, like acts like my fantasy of and my like spirit of creativity was expressed through bagels, and I had this great vision of what my company is going to be, and now this union comes in and starts like changing my dreams, and they like kind of cry and get all emotional and sappy about it. It's all the same stuff.
Hey, if someone told you couldn't exploit your workers, you'd be upset too, wouldn't you?
Yeah. And I have to give him a little more credit. He's been mostly collaborative with the union, but still, like, they all have these kind of knee-jerk tendencies, and they really fall in line with the typical union busting playbook you see everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
I think the main difference is just proximity. They are on the shop floor with workers like every day.
Yeah.
And that just makes it feel more intense and they can be more manipulative, especially if they're trying to take the good boss approach.
Yeah, because it makes them, because then they can use it like as a personal thing. Like, we work together. Why are you doing this to me? We work together every single day. Aren't we friends?
Yeah.
Aren't we a family here?
Big
And it's
time.
just like, customers that can make those relationships with workers that have been working in a place for years. Like, the bosses also have those relationships, to varying degrees of how much the workers actually respect the boss, I guess I'd say. But, they do have face-to-face relationships. And that is it is a challenge that's come up in organizing, people feeling bad for the poor boss who has more money than they know what to do with, but apparently, I don't know, because they're a parent or something like that, then we can't unionize their place, something like that. These are arguments we have to kind of work through with people.
Yeah,
I do like good boss, bad boss, sad boss. I think that's a game we should play on the show now. For
that might be a segment now.
You always get all three, I will say.
Yeah.
There's usually one primary face of the boss, but if you get all three in every union drive.
Yeah, it's one of the things that I get teased at, actually, by the workers, is they say that I have kind of an ongoing script of only like maybe 5 different things I say.
It's
and
true.
The explanation of good boss, bad boss, and sad boss is one of them. So if you come by the Philly Joint Board office, you will hear me inevitably break this down and talk about it. But it's a good framework for preparing people for union busting.
If you got good points, use them.
Well, it's also
they work.
One thing that's always struck me going back through labor history and like reading interviews of bosses or managers, even going back to like the 19 teens and 20s, that it's the exact same arguments that they're using today. And they have never come up with anything better than basically good boss, bad boss, or sad boss. That
Big time.
I guess
for your listeners, a really good book, and maybe y'all have encountered this, but The Long Deep Grudge by Tony Gilpin talks about a company that really, like in the 40s and 50s, started perfecting the human resources department and that approach to like basically accommodating unionism but doing it in a particular way that like busted all the militants and stuff.
Yeah.
And it's pretty interesting in that, like you say, there's nothing new under the sun, but like this company clearly perfected the playbook that's being used by Starbucks today, and all these companies is like identical. And just seeing that there's this long historical arc of their instruments and their weapons that they use, and it's not changed. It's helpful, especially if you're a worker and trying to organize. You should read stuff like that because it'll prepare you for what's to come.
Yeah.
Hey, Amazon's still using Pinkertons.
Right.
Shit does not change.
So is Wizards of the Coast.
Oh, great.
There's, in addition to all of the, or not in addition, but as part of all of the organizing, there's also been a lot of kind of sporadic labor actions, or not sporadic, because obviously most of them have been thoroughly planned and organized. But there have been a variety of labor actions over the past couple of years. And I wanted to get your sense of how it's been to take a wide variety of people, often in a variety of different shops, and who might not have any background in organizing or unionization, and bringing them out onto a picket line, and what challenges you faced there.
I think one thing that's kind of like a common misconception amongst labor spectators, folks that I respect, is that like workers don't want to fight and that they're afraid of striking and taking like direct action. And that just does not match my experience at all. And that's not just unique to like baristas and coffee shops. Like, I don't see it. I think most workers want to fight, but what they want is like a credible plan to victory and to like know that their coworkers are going to have their back. And that's kind of like a process of building that trust and rapport with your coworkers. So that's usually what's lacking, is like the atomization of the workforce is really the thing you're fighting and trying to overcome. But like the willingness to fight, the willingness to go on strike. I mean, the Starbucks workers in particular, they love fucking striking. Like, they're all about it. It's like they want to do it all the time and more often. And it wasn't really like hard to get them there. It was more just the process of like helping them develop more emotional maturity to meet their workers, like their coworkers where they're at, and like go deeper with the relationship building, and then have that kind of mass support that when you go out on the picket line, everybody's coming with you. But this idea that like workers are too like afraid of their boss to like confront them and take direct action, I think that's nonsense. And I also think, like, quite frankly, I think it's nonsense that like radicals and leftists have to teach them that stuff. I don't think that's true. I think most people know if I stop working, that's going to fuck with my boss's business and bottom line. But they just, what they don't know yet is whether their coworkers are going to back them up on that. And so that's what we do as organizers, is help facilitate that relationship building. But, I almost am papering over some of the other challenges that are real. Sorry, Eli.
Oh, no. No, I mean, I think one of the things that I find pretty funny about organizing with specifically a lot of like the younger baristas at Starbucks is that they're so used to striking that they don't understand that how big of a deal striking is. And they don't know that most unions don't actually strike. I have to tell them, like, what you're doing is historic. You're bringing back a level of militancy to the labor movement that hasn't been seen in quite a long time. And they just don't know that. There's not a lot of, I think there's a sort of a historical memory that's lost, right? Like, I ask workers a lot, have you been in a union before? Were your parents in unions? No one knows this idea of like respecting a picket line, which should be common sense. I think a lot of people just don't know it anymore because they don't have, their parents and grandparents weren't part of a union. But once you get people to go out on the picket line, there's all sorts of, the usual fears of retaliation and things like that. But once you get people to go out on the picket line, then they won't stop. Then they're there every single time. And as soon as a store like a Starbucks will go on strike, we can pretty much guarantee that that store will go on strike for every other major strike, and probably a couple in between that they'll do themselves, which is pretty incredible to see.
Now, it did take also, I think, a commitment and willingness from the union itself to dedicate resources and administrative capacity to facilitating these strikes. Like, one thing with the Starbucks campaign is that we had to create and then expand a robust strike fund. And this is something that I think should always exist in unions, is like a strike fund and an administrative process around it. But you'd be amazed, maybe you two wouldn't, but the average you would be amazed at how little like focus and prioritization there is in unions to even having a strike fund. So there's like just ways that unions could do a better job of being prepared for the inevitability of their workers, or their members wanting to fight. If you don't have like a strike fund, if you don't have an administration around these things, if people don't know what the process is to like accessing strike funds and like what the plan is from their union, like, well, of course we are not going to see mass strikes like we used to, as well as, the hamstringing that we've experienced through labor law. I mean, that makes it more difficult too. But I think a lot of this is like unions' own doing. The historical memory that's lost that Eli is talking about, where like we don't even teach workers that striking is an option. I blame the business union bureaucrats for that. And then the fact that we don't even put money in like our strike, like what are members' dues dollars for, if not like for their own self-defense? Like, this stuff I think is just shameful that we're in this position as a labor movement. And like, we would be seeing way more strikes if it weren't for just some of the lackluster and, kind of apathetic nature of most union officialdom.
It's also interesting talking about having a having a standing strike fund and having all of the administration around that, because there, especially in the textile industry, there were a lot of things where like they would declare a general strike and the union itself would go from a couple hundred members to thousands in like 5 days. And then all of a sudden they have to support all of these people for a month or two. And that's something that you kept running into, of like, it would grow by tenfold overnight and then collapse in on itself because there just wasn't infrastructure to support that.
I think another thing is that the labor movement has laid dormant for so long that like when a strike's called, everyone gets like so excited. Strike, all right, let's go on strike without like thinking about everything that you have to do to put on a strike and how many people you have to care for. So I think a lot of these days, because the labor movement feels like it went from like 0 to 60 overnight, and there's more to it than just calling a strike, as you know.
It's true. We have catching up to do, I think. Like, if you're on the staff side and you're like an elected union leader, you got to catch up and you got to start moving a little faster. Like, I don't have much patience for people that don't work their fucking ass off in these positions, because members want to strike. Workers want to fight their bosses. So we've got to catch up. We've got to create this infrastructure. We've got to make it known that we're building this so that when it comes time to do all the necessary work of striking, we're ready to do it. And it's not like taking us by surprise. Like, there's just no excuse.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, granted, sorry.
Oh.
I was just going to say, granted that it is very different when you're coordinating like a gigantic national strike, like like with the UPS or with UAW or something like that. But my experience has shown that workers, once they get out on strike and they've received strike pay for a day or 3 days that they've gone on strike, now they're just ready to walk out without pay when their demands aren't being met. That's happening a lot at Starbucks right now. Workers are just fed up with the short staffing, this kind of squeeze that the company is pushing on them. And it doesn't matter to them that they're not getting paid. They're just not putting up with it because it's not dignified work,
That makes me so happy. I can just say this. It makes me it makes me so fucking proud to hear this. I mean, it's horrible that you don't have a backup fund. Like, no one does. Like, everyone's, if you miss one paycheck, you're screwed. But I mean, the commitment that these workers have, you're saying, Alex and Eli, you guys are saying that they want to fight their bosses. It's amazing to hear. It's refreshing.
They not only do they want to fight their bosses, some of them like want to like create like sadistic psychological games and warfare on their bosses. Like, they are so willing to fight that they're like not even satisfied with just striking and withholding their labor. They want to like make them. Well, anyway, I don't want to make them sound like them, but still, some of the creative ideas that they have for pressure tactics have been kind of astounding. Like, they make me happy to hear too.
Good.
Yeah, making bosses cry is my favorite thing. So,
no, we're so mean to the bosses.
Yeah,
I
know. So, what's the toughest challenge that you faced over the past couple of years, with all of the various drives, both at Starbucks and in Local 80?
Catching up, to be honest, for me, I think has been a challenge, which I think we've done a good job at. But like, there's this old labor guy, George Rawick, who said, unions don't organize workers, workers organize unions. And I think I started to really understand what he meant by that expression. Like, we really had to catch up and like keep pace with the explosion of organizing. Mm-hmm. So that's definitely been a challenge, and it's always kind of a challenge to catch up. That's a good challenge, though. I call that a high quality problem. But then also, I got to say, like the challenge that all unions face is like when you come down to like bargaining and like settling a contract with an employer. If like your goal and mission is to like get a contract, well, then the terrain of organizing shifts and you don't have as much control over it as you did if the organizing is really focused on just direct action and winning immediate gains. And that's just a reality. Like, I'm not trying to like put out a position of like being anti-contract or pro-contract, but when the fight shifts to a contract campaign, you lose a lot of agency in what you can will upon the employer and what labor law really does for you, which is basically jack shit. And that is hard because the boss's main weapon is time. So they're going to stall and drag their feet, and getting them to move and move faster is a challenge. I think it's a challenge that we're going to overcome in Local 80. But this is the reason that most unions have been unwilling to organize these industries and take on these big fights. It's because they don't have the confidence that they can actually win contracts from them. And that's not a completely misguided assessment of the situation. Like, there's reasons that unions think that. So the contract itself has been hard, but I'm optimistic.
Yeah, I think another hard thing is the pushback that workers face, obviously it comes in varying degrees. For Starbucks, there's a squeeze on worker hours. They're running these promotionals, which is making it more busy with less staff. They're not getting paid predictability pay according to Fair Workweek laws, the Philly's ordinance. They're not getting their sick time inputted correctly, things like that. And it's been frustrating to sort of be building as much power as we can build, and still have to deal kind of with these should be simple solution issues. That being said, some of our most successful actions have come out of agitation around, say, like Fair Work Week and sick time, where, at a Starbucks on the Penn Med campus, workers there confronted their manager who hadn't inputted their sick time, their vacation time, their predictability pay, confronted them, stopped production, walked off the floor, confronted them in front of all of the customers. And the next day they came in and the manager was just handing people wads of cash and back pay. So there's been successes, but, still everyone in that shop hasn't gotten paid. We need to get more wads of cash to more workers. Yeah.
Yeah, we did a whole episode on wage theft, and it's a lot worse than people think.
It is. It's terrible.
Big time, especially in the food service world.
Yeah.
And do you think that having, or actually not having, a contract with Starbucks has given you some advantages in terms of, or for those like shop floor actions?
Yeah, I mean, it's the weird irony of the National Labor Relations Act, right? Is that there is no reason that no strike clauses should be so commonplace in the union world. Unions literally surrendered their rights to strike. And that's why no strike clauses are like basically 99% of all contracts have them in this country. So without the contract, you actually have more rights and more powers to do strikes and other forms of direct action than with a contract often. But that's like another place where I think the labor movement has failed, is like that's of our own choosing. And now we've created this precedent for like 70 some odd years where the no strike clause is just commonplace, to where we had a negotiating session with one of the local 80 employers where we as a local are insisting on our right to maintain our strike powers. We call it our strike process article rather than the no strike clause, no lockouts. And we won it in Korshak. So Korshak Bagels has a strike process clause. So we don't have a no strike clause. We actually have the right to strike. When we proposed the same thing in a different employer negotiation, they said they were so outraged that they said that we might as well have taken a shit in the middle of the room with like putting that proposal on the table. Like that's how offended they were. And then our lead negotiator, one of the workers, I think had a good rebuttal saying like, all of your proposals have been taking massive shits in the room. And so I don't know. It was like a good back and forth. But this is like the way they act, like you like are, they like clutch their pearls when you say like, we're not going to surrender our strike rights and power. And that's just, again, another place where the labor movement has kind of made its own bed. Like there's no reason to surrender your strike powers. But now that every other fucking union does it, they've like set this precedent, and the status quo now is the expectation is there's no strike clause. The going logic is like, why would they agree to labor peace if you don't agree to peace? Well, they're really purchasing labor power and like the price of labor. They're not purchasing labor peace from the workers. Sorry.
Yeah, they find it so bizarre. Another local 80 employer during a bargaining session, when we presented the strike process clause, said, the lawyer said something along the lines of, as far as I know, there's only one contract in the city without a no strike clause. And we were like, yes, Korshak Bagels in our local. And immediately the lawyer and their assistant just like turned sort of furiously taking notes. So it has some, I don't know, its reputation precedes it, I guess.
And not to force you guys to pick favorites from among your children, what's been your greatest victory over the past couple of years?
I mean, I love all the strikes, but I gotta say, like, these workers are fucking awesome. There are so many. I don't have a favorite because there's too many like badass worker leaders from these shops, both Local 80 and Starbucks, that I just love. Like, they're awesome, and they, I'm an old man. Like, I have like a weathered heart. I can't like feel anything anymore. But this campaign actually like has somehow broken through the chilly ice over my heart. Like, makes me feel things again. Like, it makes me inspired. So there's a lot of victories, but for me, a lot of those victories come down to just seeing these individual workers just become such badass leaders over time and continue to develop and get better at what they do, give the bosses a hard time, do marches on the boss that get them wads of cash the next day. Like, stuff like that is just awesome.
Yeah, I think this is kind of hard to quantify, but seeing workers develop where they can just support one another. 2 weeks ago, I had a missed call on my phone, and I called the worker back. I didn't realize for a few hours I was out doing house calls, and I was like, "Is everything okay? How are you? What happened?" And they were just like, "Oh yeah, we just wanted to walk out. We just didn't know how. So I called this other worker, and they told us how. And so we walked out, and they just shut down their store with the help of another worker who had done it before. And the more we build that network, the more people that just participate in it. There's always someone available who can guide you on, what you need to do to be protected to walk out.
That's amazing.
Yeah, the peer-to-peer mentorship has been great to see.
Yeah.
And something that we try to embrace on the Starbucks campaign that I think probably we would benefit from also introducing in the Local 80, but I think we do it without calling it this, is we took like a note from like the News Guild that like really developed this interesting internship model for their union. Rather than hiring a bunch of staff, they like kind of put members in charge and gave them like small stipends to do the work. And they called the model learn it, do it, teach it. So the whole thing was like you learn it first, then you do it, and then you teach it to your coworkers. And we've adopted the same motto on the Starbucks campaign. And again, I think we kind of do it de facto in Local 80. And it works. Like, if you put time in teaching and mentoring workers, they will grow as leaders and they will develop more leaders with them. Like, it's the deep organizing that people call it. Takes more time. It's more labor intensive, but it works. And in the long run, it actually takes weight off of your shoulders, because then you can miss a phone call on Sunday morning and the workers got it and they teach each other how to strike instead of you having to do it.
Or, when you have to do a bunch of house calls, and, one of the workers in Local 80 has been my friend for, around 4 years now. We met during the Barista Council and is one of the lead organizers at Ultimo. And it just always amazes me that, they can kind of take the leadership under their wing and, bring people, have one-on-one organizing conversations with strangers at the door. And I'm not even around, that feels incredible as well.
That's awesome. And so without giving too much away, what are your plans for the future of Local 80 and Philly Starbucks Workers United?
For Local 80, and I would say this is probably true of Starbucks too, one of the things that we're really trying to embrace is industrial unionism. Workers United gets to boast being like one of the descendants of the Lady Garment Workers Union and some historical industrial unions that really broke the mold in the early 20th century of craft unionism. And that's still a spirit that we want to like apply today. Labor law makes it difficult to be like a proper industrial union, with their like control over bargaining units and all that. But nevertheless, what we want to do with Local 80 is start really expanding the scope of workers that we are organizing to where it's not just primarily retail workers. This is an industry. And if it's an industry, we need to organize the entire industry. And that's the way we're going to build more and more power. The retail workers are a part of it. We just consider them kind of like the first wave, but that first wave can't end there. It's got to like expand into more sectors of the industry to really have a proper industrial union. So that's kind of like putting out the long vision and ambitions and hope. But in the short term, the ambition is to win powerful first contracts, continue to organize new shops across the city, get to a high density where we turn these jobs into jobs that don't have the reputation of being temporary or for unskilled workers, but actually like career jobs that you can do and pull down to actually raise like a family, support yourself, as well as your networks that rely on you, and have respect amongst the broader population. Like the status of these jobs needs to be elevated.
You mean these aren't just summer jobs for 13-year-olds?
Yeah, exactly.
Sure.
Like, I always bring up like the Nelson Lichtenstein talked about, and I can't remember in which book, but the high turnover rates of like mine workers in the early 20th century and how like seasonal these jobs were. Like mine workers were often like a seasonal job that you like kind of walked to the next place and like moved on. And the like status of that work was like so demeaning. Like people thought it was like, might as well clean up my shit rather than, do that. Right. Like it was just such a demeaning job and seen as like seasonal, temporary, low wage, unskilled work. And now like you see on like the Twitter and our great Instagram archivist, page, whenever you post something about baristas organizing, there's always that one jackass that says, well, if it was like a miner, I can understand them needing a union, but why would a barista need a union? So now like the miners have become like the standard bearer for like workers that deserve a union.
Yeah, right.
Well, at a certain point, you got to change the industry by organizing it to make it to where it's understood that baristas are workers that deserve a union.
Yeah. And hopefully we don't have to like resort to open warfare and getting bombed to have barista unions.
Well, it is a class war, right?
Yeah.
So, I don't know.
Warfare is fine. I don't want to get bombed, but
yeah.
Although I would like to see a group of Molly Maguire baristas. That'd be very interesting.
Blowing up
I think
espresso machines. And,
Well, they would wear booty shorts and cut off shirts, but they would look good while doing it.
yeah. All right. Well, I don't have any further questions. Do you have anything, Sam?
I gotta say, I'm just some type of hack journalist, I guess. But, it gets me emotional when we have these interviews. The same thing happened with the Philadelphia Museum of Art workers that we interviewed a while back. And it becomes so personal when you hear about the struggles of these actual people who are living paycheck to paycheck. And these are people who should not be exploited. They should have been able to support themselves and their families, and they should have food on their plates, blah, blah, blah. And as I said before, it's refreshing to hear that these workers want to fight back, that they want to stand their ground. And I appreciate the work that you guys and the workers that you work alongside with are doing.
thank you.
Yeah. Well, solidarity, comrade.
Solidarity, yes.
All right. Well, solidarity. And thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight.